a few of the names that have come up onto the screen as you've entered the Zoom meeting, and so it's good to have some familiar names with some familiar faces behind. Uh, why don't we just move into the first slide, Lissa? Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And Lissa is going to be controlling the slides for me tonight, just because I had some sharing troubles with my computer here. But I would also like to mention, if there is any questions as we're progressing through the presentation, please feel free to stop me where I'm at and ask that question. If you have any experiences that you would like to share as a sheep producer, I would like to hear those, as I'm sure the rest of the group would too. And so please feel free to interact with me and the rest of the group as we're working through the presentation here tonight. You know, this was a topic that I just think has so much importance, because as we look at preparing for a successful lambing season, which some of you on the meeting tonight might be going through that process just now. I know I actually seen some names that came up, and I know you're going through the lambing season right now. And but if we look at a successful lambing season, success in the lambing season really does start. We're probably looking at 6 to 8 months in advance for a successful lambing season, and that really starts with preparation for a successful breeding season. We know that more investment that we make into preparing both ewes and rams, goat bucks and goat does for the breeding season really does have a big impact on their fertility. And it will really influence the number of lambs that we're able to wean per ewe or doe exposed to that breeding male or males that we have within the herd or the flock. Studies have been done to look at the financial status of sheep and goat operations throughout the U.S. And we do know that for each ewe or doe that we make an investment in, with feed costs, with housing costs, with veterinary costs, the more lambs that she gives us in return just simply gives us a better opportunity for being profitable within that operation. And so you'll see in the figure in the upper right-hand corner, that strong relationship that does exist between productivity of the ewe and profitability of the sheep and goat enterprise. And we know that for ewes to be productive at the lambing season, or goat does to be productive during the kidding season, we really have to prepare them for the breeding season. And so preparation for the breeding season really starts anywhere from 30 to 60 days prior to us actually managing the breeding season. Remember, the breeding season is something that is imposed by, we say it's imposed by man, or it's imposed by us as humans, whereas the sexual season of sheep, that might not always be in the same time frame as what the breeding season is. And so that term breeding season, we prepare 1 to 2 months in advance. This includes management not only of the ewe flock itself, nor does it include management of only the rams, but it's really both, right? Because we know that it takes both sexes to create marketable lambs for us at the end of the day. And so, if there's one thing that we can remember and take home as we look forward to the management of our sheep operation in the future, it's that investment of time into managing rams and ewes 1 to 2 months before the breeding season really does influence profitability. And so let's move on to the next slide there, Lissa, if we can. Yeah, and so we're going to first break this down by ewes and rams. And the first thing we're going to talk about is preparation of ewes for the breeding season. We're going to look at some general management aspects of ewes, some nutritional considerations of ewes, and then some reproductive management techniques or tools that we could use as we prepare ewes for and during the breeding season. We'll go to the next slide there, Lissa. And so we'll start with general management aspects. Yeah, I think it's always important for producers to sit back and really take inventory. It's good to know what you're working with at the start of the breeding season. And so taking that inventory of your ewe numbers, your ewe ages, their past productivity, whether it's a ewe that you want to continue to invest in for the next 5 to 7 months or not, or if it's better to move on from that ewe or that doe. And so take inventory 1 to 2 months before the breeding season. This also gives us an opportunity to identify ewes that just simply need to have an improved nutritional status. Are they really thin ewes? And if we put them into the breeding season and their current body condition score, are we going to see poor fertility in those ewes? I think it also gives us just one more opportunity, if we didn't do it at the time of weaning or shortly after weaning, one more opportunity to check the udders on those ewes. And so take your hand, put it down in between the rear legs, and just see if we have two functional mammary glands, one on each side of the that ewe's udder. Really eliminating work and more labor than what we are already probably putting into our sheep enterprise by removing those females that do have half-uddered females. I can't tell you how many times in my years of raising sheep, but I'm sure many of you would agree that you will have a ewe come into the lambing season and you just simply missed the fact that she did have a half udder. And that's probably the one that's going to give you triplets at the same time. And here she has half of a mammary system there to feed, three lambs for you. And so that can be a frustrating experience. And we're all well aware of the cost of milk replacer. So identifying those ewes and moving on with those ewes, culling them is a wise decision at this stage. I think it's also important, as we're considering ewes that we're going to cull based on udder quality, or maybe they're just some hard-doing ewes that are these thin ewes consistently, no matter how much feed we offer them. Get a scrapie tag in those ewes so we can be in compliance with the USDA scrapie system. And if we send them to market, they have a scrapie ear tag. And also replace any lost flock tags that we have too, because those are going to be so important as we plan to keep records during the breeding season, breeding records, and as we progress into doing pregnancy diagnosis and ear tag associated with the pregnancy status of that ewe, as well as having that ewe ear tagged as we move into the lambing season. And go ahead, Lissa. And this represents also, as we're up close to those females and we have them in a confined area, to identify females that have hoof problems. If you have been raising sheep for many years, or if you're just new to raising sheep and you deal with foot rot or foot scald on a regular basis, you're well aware that could be one of the number one reasons as to why sheep producers and goat producers do get out of the business. It's just too much labor to treat foot scald and to treat foot rot. But we know that both of the bacteria that work together in a synergistic fashion to cause foot rot, they're what we call anaerobic bacteria. And so they're bacteria that like to be in the absence of oxygen. And anytime we have overgrowth of the hoof wall, the toe, and the heel, that usually collects dirt and debris. And those bacteria that cause foot rot and don't like oxygen just love that environment. And so that's where they really thrive. And so if we can clean off that hoof wall, that toe, and that heel, and expose that hoof to some oxygen, that in itself is really going to help to clear up any foot rot or scald that we're dealing with. Good to do this a month before the breeding season, because if you have dealt with foot rot or foot scald in the past, you know that if it's a situation that's been left untreated for a few weeks or even a couple months, that foot can get pretty ugly. And so the more you can expose it to oxygen and give that ewe time to recover, so that when she comes into estrus, she's going to be able to seek out that ram as he's also seeking out her, and you're going to have a better chance of fertility. Give you a little bit of an image of a hoof trimmer that I like to use. I prefer personally to use the hoof trimmers with the serrated edge. It just grabs onto that hoof wall and toe for me a little bit better. But there's a variety of hoof trimmers out there, and it seems like everybody likes a slightly different hoof trimmer. But I like how this one fits in my hand, and I like that serrated edge that it has. If you do have problems with foot scald and foot rot, copper sulfate or zinc sulfate foot baths do work quite well after the trimming process. And we typically use a 10% weight of zinc or copper sulfate relative to the volume of water that we have. And so, in other words, it really, if we have, let's just say 10, for every gallon of water, we're probably looking at adding just a little bit less than a pound of zinc or copper sulfate. And so a 10% weight by volume ratio. And you'll be able to find online as well, ideal mixtures for copper and zinc sulfate foot baths, but work quite effectively. I do know some producers, still have maintained their flocks as they get into their senior years. And I'll just use my father, for example, an individual who's in his late 70s. He still has 30 ewes, and he just likes having that ewe flock is a part of his life. And he came down with some foot scald this past fall, and he's at that stage in life where it was just easier for him to use injectable antibiotics to clean up that foot scald. And he used New Floor, and within a few days after New Floor injection, according to body weight, he had very good results with that. And so a variety of different techniques can be used to treat foot scald, but the most important thing is that we do take care of it. If we could go to the next slide, Lisa, and again, yeah, go ahead.
We did have a question that you might want to address on this slide, if that's okay. There was a question about, has there been any correlation of feed issues and organic iodine used in feed and mineral?
Oh, when I was working at the Hettinger Research Extension Center in southwestern North Dakota, I want to say we did have some iodine supplementation, and it was beneficial for foot health. But and so I'm familiar with the relationship there with iodine and an improved foot health. But I am just trying. But I don't know if I can't recall off the top of my head what the dosage on that would be. Does that answer that viewer's question?
I think so. And if it didn't, we'll get back to it later.
Yeah, you bet. But yeah, to come back to that, yes, I've very familiar with that experience that I had when I was working in North Dakota. Preparation of ewes also involves staying on top of our parasite concerns, if you like, that we have within the flock. Making sure that we deworm those ewes that are obviously having difficulty handling a parasite load is really what we want to focus on. I'm not sure how many individuals in the audience have heard of anthelmintic resistance, or simply some parasites within a population of parasites that do develop resistance over time to the anthelmintics. And that's typically in situations where we have overuse of anthelmintics. But I, in my own personal flock, and it's a recommendation that I make to all the sheep breeders that I work with now, is to really only deworm those individuals that are showing clinical signs of parasitism and need to be treated because they can't handle a regular parasite load. If you look at mature cattle or mature ewes, really those mature females should have a strong enough immune system to be able to handle parasitism without the use of anthelmintics. And but if we do have to use anthelmintics, using them again 1 month before the breeding season to rid that animal, or at least reduce the parasite level, is very helpful. We know parasites, right? They derive nutrients at the expense of the host animal. And so any nutrients we're putting into that ewe or that doe during the flushing process, or just simply trying to bring her body condition score up, she obviously has to compete with those parasites in her system. You'll notice here that I do say stay away from some anthelmintics because of the data that's available on them. There is some data to suggest that valbazen at least in cattle, and is embryotoxic. And so females in the early stages of pregnancy can abort their embryos in response to valbazen usage. And keep in mind too, if you're a producer who's really trying to maximize profitability of your sheep operation, you're probably breeding your ewe lambs and attempting to get those ewe lambs to lamb at 1 year of age. There's really no productive advantage to sit back and wait for ewe lambs as they turn 1.5 years and then breed them for the first time. It really is advantageous to breed your ewe lambs. They just have a longer lifetime productivity. And so I'm a big advocate for that. And there's plenty of data to support that. But you want to keep those ewe lambs growing so that you do get as high of an overall conception rate or pregnancy rate within those ewe lambs. And so they can be productive contributors to the flock. I'm assuming that we do have some producers in the group here tonight that have used the Fafa-Milan chart or the FAMACHA system that we have. And if you look at Fafa-Milan was the individual that developed this for us out of Africa, and you're going to see that we have various colors or various shades of red to pink, and then all the way to white. And this is a chart system that's used to just simply evaluate the degree of anemia in response to the primary blood-sucking parasite that houses itself in the true stomach of our sheep, the abomasum. This is a parasite in the southern United States that has really caused a lot of sheep and goat producers to get out of the business because there's populations of Haemonchus contortus within their sheep and goat flocks that are completely resistant to our anthelmintic products. And so this chart, what it allows us to do is it allows us to identify females with a more pinkish appearance to their lower eyelid. And if those females have a pinkish appearance to their lower eyelid, obviously they are able to handle whatever they do have for a parasite load, and they still have a high enough red blood cell count to be thrifty and to get enough simply oxygen pumped throughout their bodies. And so this is a very useful system that really helps to avoid anthelmintic resistance and overusage of our anthelmintic products. Go ahead, Lissa. And of course, Lissa, you let me know if there's any questions. When it comes to vaccinations for abortions prior to the breeding season is a really good time to consider taking care of that. And we have the Campylobacter fetus for preventing vibriosis, the chlamydia psittaci for preventing enzootic abortion in ewes. But if you look at the recommendations for these two vaccines, for these two abortive diseases, these are both both of these diseases, Vibrio and enzootic abortion in ewes, are obviously caused by bacteria. And so we can vaccinate for these particular bacterial causes of abortion. Notice, though, that they start prior to the breeding season, up to 60 days before the breeding season for enzootic abortion, for example. I would not recommend vaccinating your ewes for Vibrio or enzootic abortion if you haven't had a history of abortions. I think it's just not necessary. I think a vaccination protocol for a sheep or goat flock really does have to align with the history of that particular sheep or goat, sheep flock or goat herd. And I would also say that supplies for these vaccines are very limited, and so you'd want to order them early, very early. Go ahead, Lissa. And let's move on to some nutritional considerations of the ewe. We're not going to get to the point to where we balance rations for ewes based on the feed resources, but I do want to visit with you about what's just some general nutritional management considerations. Yeah. Hopefully you've had some experience at this stage, and if not, we can talk about it here this evening with body condition scoring your ewes. If we look at the original source for determining body condition scoring in ewes, It simply involves palpation of the lumbar vertebrae. And so literally getting your hands on those ewes and palpating what we'd refer to as the loin region of that sheep. So putting your hands behind the last rib, but yet in front of the hip. And really what we're looking for is the prominence of the spinous process. If you look at an old dairy cow and you can see her spine sticking straight up, we feel for that and we palpate that just over the loin region of the ewe. And then also feeling for the prominence of what we call the transverse process, those bones that stick out on the edges of the loin. We use a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 would be an emaciated ewe. An emaciated ewe with a body condition score of 1, that's a ewe that's near death. A body condition score 5 ewe, an obese ewe, that's one where we simply cannot feel the spinous process and the transverse process at all. And so that loin is just real round and filled in with muscle to its maximum capacity, as well as covered up with a tremendous amount of subcutaneous fat. And neither one of those ends of the scale are good for ewe fertility. We really want to shoot for a body condition score. You're going to see here, I'm actually going to drop down a little bit below average and say a 2.5 body condition score is really optimal. So not necessarily having ewes that are thin, but maybe just a little bit thin and fit looking is what I would say is kind of the ideal body condition score. And again, for meat goats, we can use that same scale of a 1 to a 5. Yeah, this here image shows us a body condition score 3. And so we're just taking a cross section of this animal, specifically within its lumbar region. And notice we can still feel the spinous process of that particular ewe, but it's relatively smooth. We can't feel the individual vertebrae so much. Notice the loin muscles here in this particular ewe too. They're plumper, they're bigger. So body condition scoring really does involve more or less of the two tissues that we're concerned with here, which is going to be not only fat, but also muscle. And if we can go to the next one, and there we have a body condition score 5 female. In the really extreme end where we have an obese ewe, again, can't feel that those lumbar vertebrae whatsoever, and we'll actually even have just a little dimple that runs along the top side of that ewe's body. Hopefully we don't have too many producers here this evening that have ewes or does in that body condition score 5 range, and 1 likewise, but we're all kind of sitting right around a 2.5 or a 3 as we enter into the breeding season. This is the reason why I say a body condition score of 2.5 versus, let's just say, a 3 or a 4 as we enter into the breeding season for ewes and does. It's because we want to take advantage of this concept referred to as the flushing effect. We know that when ewes go from a slightly negative energy balance, or in other words, they're just a little bit thin, and we put them into what we refer to as a positive energy balance, where they consume more energy in their diet and they're starting to deposit fat on their bodies, and they're starting to enhance the muscle mass on their bodies. One of the things we're going to see associated with that, one of the things we're going to see associated with that is just simply an increase in ovulation rate. And so this figure here, it shows us how we can get this bump in ovulation rate, or this slight improvement in ovulation rate, in response to flushing ewes when they're at a body condition score of roughly 2.5. If they're at a body condition score of 3 or higher, we're really not going to see the beneficial effects of flushing. And so again, how can we move these ewes into a positive energy balance? We can just simply provide a half pound of corn or a half pound of barley, so one of our cereal grains, for example, or we can move them to a more lush pasture. There, they would increase their energy intake as well. And we typically want to do that at 2 to 4 weeks before the breeding season starts, because that's when we want to work that body condition score up, see the beneficial effects of flushing, increase ovulation rate. And remember, Yeah, this all goes back to management of ewes prior to the breeding season. Ultimately, it determines the profitability of the flock at the time of lambing and subsequently weaning. And so here we're flushing ewes 2 to 4 weeks before the breeding season so that we ultimately have more lambs born per ewe. Go ahead, Lisa. There are some distinct disadvantages that do exist with having ewes that would be considered very thin or very fat. This was some data that was generated at North Dakota State University when I was on faculty there. This was actually my master's advisor, Anna Grazul-Bilska. And Anna had 3 groups of ewes. She had a group of ewes that she managed to have a body condition score 2. She had a group of ewes that she managed to have a body condition score 3, so kind of what we'd consider to be normal. And then she had a group of ewes that she managed to be a body condition score of 4. She then collected oocytes off of the ovaries of those ewes, and she performed what's called in vitro fertilization, or she basically took those eggs, put them in a petri dish, and mixed them with sperm cells. And what Anna found was that ewes of body condition score 2, real thin ewes, or real fat ewes, they had substantially lower rates of fertilization relative to our normal body condition score ewes. And so this really does tell us that having ewes that are obese or extremely thin, they do have lower fertility. This is some additional data that just shows the pregnancy rates in response to body condition score. I managed a group of ewes that were body condition score 4 versus 3. And again, we had very acceptable pregnancy rates in those females that were 3s. Those ewes that were higher in body condition score, they also had lower pregnancy rates in response to artificial insemination, just like the IVF data that we showed you earlier. Yeah, so body condition score does have an economic impact on the sheep operation. Yeah, let's move on into reproductive management of ewes. Yeah, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about estrus synchronization. You know, there's a variety of tools that producers have access to. We can use all those tools in combination, or we can use some of these tools just individually. But there really is, I think whether you're a small scale sheep or goat producer, or whether you're a large scale sheep or goat producer, there's some distinct advantages to using estrus synchronization products. And if you're an individual that, like most of us, and I'm sure just about all of us in the audience tonight, we raise sheep as a secondary enterprise. And we want the lambing season to be convenient for us and convenient around our work schedule. And estrus synchronization really represents an opportunity to make the lambing season a lot easier for us. In addition to just simply knowing when those ewes are going to lamb, because we'd ultimately have a better idea with when those ewes were bred by the ram or the buck and ultimately established a pregnancy, we simply get a higher proportion of ewes early in the breeding season to conceive for us. And what that means is at the beginning of the lambing season, we'll have a higher proportion of ewes that will lamb for us. And if that's the case, when we do wean those lambs, we'll have just simply a heavier, more uniform lamb crop. And like all groups of livestock, the more weight that we have to market, as well as the more uniformity within those individuals in that group, that'll fetch a higher sale price for us. And so there is some distinct advantages to estrus synchronization, but as we talk about these different products, we'll also bring up the costs. So you can determine based on the costs if estrus synchronization is still a good fit for your operation. Yeah, and so here we have just a simple protocol laid out for us with what's referred to as a CEDAR device. CEDAR device, also known as the acronym represents Controlled Internal Drug Release Device. It contains a hormone called progesterone. a hormone that's naturally found during really the majority of the estrus cycle of our ewes and does. Here we're looking at the use of a CEDAR device during the regular sexual season of the ewe. And so we're probably looking at maybe August all the way through December and maybe even into January, where we'd be, depending on the operation and when you prefer to breed your ewes and when you prefer to have your lambs born. This would be would simply be a 12-day CEDAR treatment. And so on day -12, that could be any day that you decided was the best fit for you for when you wanted your ewes to be in heat and be bred. You just would simply insert that CEDAR device. You'd leave it in place for 12 days. Now, you'll see in a slide that comes up here shortly, you can leave these CEDAR devices in for as short as 6 days, maybe even as long as 18 days. But either way, about 2 days after you pull that CEDAR device, the large majority of ewes will come in to estrus. And so you can potentially take a flock of 100 ewes, put a CEDAR device in them, leave it in place for 12 days, pull it out, and 48 hours later, you'd have all 100 of your ewes come into heat. Now, I'm sure you can imagine some disadvantages to that, or how the ram might struggle with getting that all 100 of those ewes bred. That'd be a pretty daunting task. But at the same time, we'll talk about how we can break up that estrus behavior in those ewes by pulling at different times. You're going to see here too that we also have an injection of PG600 added to this protocol. And I wouldn't suggest using PG600 unless you're for natural breeding purposes, unless you're very early in the sexual season, or you're simply trying to breed ewes in the spring of the year and ultimately have fall lambs. But total cost of a CEDAR and some PG600, that cost is up a little bit higher than that now. We're probably looking at close to $15. Another product that is added to the diet, you'd have to work with your veterinarian to utilize, is melangestrol acetate. It's also a progestin product that's consumed by the ewe. It's absorbed by her digestive tract, and it has the same effect on her body as what a CEDAR device would. But as you can imagine, if these ewes are only consuming this melangestrol acetate once a day, maybe twice a day, the levels of this hormone are going to rise and fall and rise and fall in response to a once a day or twice a day consumption, whereas a CEDAR device provides a consistent level of progesterone in the blood. But if we move on to the next slide, what we're going to see here is we have some dosage recommendations. We could feed this product for 10 to 14 days. The appropriate dose for sheep would be 0.3 milligrams per ewe per day. Much less expensive relative to using a CEDAR device, where a CEDAR device is maybe anywhere from $6 to $8 per ewe. We're looking at MGA being closer to maybe 10 cents to 15 cents per day. And so it's substantially less expensive. And again, just to ensure that all ewes would be consuming this melangestrol acetate uniformly, you have to have enough bunk space to where they can all get in there and consume that product that you'd have mixed into your feed prior to hand. This is a standard MGA protocol to where we could start feeding melangestrol acetate on day -12, stop feeding it 12 days later. And you're going to see here that ewes will start to come into estrus about 2 days after we stop feeding it, maybe all the way to 4 or even 6 days after we stop feeding it. And so we're going to see a larger distribution of estrus activity or heat activity in ewes when we do stop feeding melangestrol acetate. But again, it's a much less expensive way to synchronize estrus activity in your ewes. If you're a producer that is looking at using an estrus synchronization protocol during the normal sexual season of sheep, and so I'm going to say, I'm going to adjust these dates a little bit that are in the lower left-hand corner, lower right-hand corner, excuse me. I'd say probably mid-August through the sexual season of the ewe, which might go all the way through January into possibly even early February for us. You can get by with using prostaglandin F2 alpha. Prostaglandin F2 alpha, it is a prescription product, so you would have to work with your veterinarian to secure this product. There's a variety of different trade names for our prostaglandin products. We have Lutelyse, Lutelyse Hycon, we have Estromate. Estromate and Lutelyse Hycon, your normal dose is going to be 0.5 milliliters, and it's an intramuscular injection. Your regular Lutelyse product, the red label Lutelyse product, that the normal dose for that is going to be 2 milliliters. But this is just an example of how we could take a large group of ewes and get them all to come into estrus or heat within a very narrow window. And so we could inject this product on a Monday, come back the following Monday and do a second injection. And then typically within 2 to 4 days, all of those females should come into heat for us. And so we could turn in the ram with that subset or group of females that are all in heat. And as long as we got an appropriate ram to ewe ratio for synchronized estrus, we could get those ewes bred and document some breeding dates on them and ultimately have some documented or predicted lambing dates for those females. Yeah. And so I think when we look at success with an estrus synchronization protocol for sheep, there's a few things we have to take in mind. It really doesn't make a lot of sense, if you like, to invest a lot of money in these estrus synchronization products that we have unless we know the rams or the goat bucks that we're going to turn in with these females are truly fertile. And so you'll want to perform a breeding soundness examination on your rams or your goat bucks prior to making the investment into these estrus synchronization products. You'll also want to make sure that you have rams that are not only fertile, but mature enough and at what we would refer to as sexual maturity, as opposed to just simply having achieved puberty, in order to cover the number of ewes that you're wanting to bring into estrus or heat at a single point in time. I think it's so important. I think one of the most underrated reproductive management tools that we as sheep and goat producers have access to would simply be a marking harness. Marking harnesses tell us so much about the estrus behavior of our ewes, the fertility of our rams, and we're going to talk more about marking harnesses here in just a little bit. But keep in mind too that these products themselves, they'll even be that much more effective as we enter into shorter and cooler days, because that's really what needs to happen to bring these females into their normal sexual season. And, there is a variety of ways to use these different products. Use them in a way that's financially feasible for your operation, and avoid products that simply are going to be too expensive, and they're going to, have that potential to take too much of the profit away from your sheep operation. I wanted to put together a scenario for you here this evening. Let's just say you're maybe a smaller scale sheep producer. We're going to put you in a scenario where you have 30 mature ewes. If you're a goat producer and you're with us this evening, you could just imagine that we're dealing with 30 mature does as well. Okay, so you can pick your species there, and you have an appropriate ram or buck to ewe or doe ratio as well. You have if you have 30 mature females, having 2 rams or 2 bucks is definitely appropriate. But you want to use estrus synchronization techniques to shorten your lambing season and ultimately predict when each individual female within your flock is going to lamb, so you can maximize lamb survival, let's just say. This is very similar to what I do with my natural breeding scheme that I have at home. Before I get this started, I determine which ewes I want to breed to which rams based on their physical conformation, attributes that those females need to be improved upon based on the rams that are available. And and I just have an idea with which rams I want to breed to which ewes. And then I'll make sure I have all my supplies purchased. And here in this scenario, I would use cedar devices in combination with PG600, and I develop a timeline like we see right here. But I do actually have about 30 ewes. I'll take those ewes and I'll put cedar devices in all 30. on a same day. After 8 days, I will pull cedar devices and give an injection of PG 600 into 6 of those ewes, 6 of those 30. So there's a fifth of them there that I've pulled the cedars on and injected PG 600. I'll take the half that I want to breed to Ram A and put them with Ram A. I'll take the half that I want to breed to Ram B and go ahead and put them with Ram B. 2 days after that, I will then pull cedars on additional 6 ewes. And keep in mind, here on day 10, when I'm pulling that second group of cedars on these females, that group from day 8 should all be coming into heat and being marked by the ram with the marking harness. On this group that I'm pulling on day 10, 3 will go to Ram A and 3 will go to Ram B. And so as soon as he gets done breeding these 3, he's gonna have 3 more that'll be coming into heat. And we're not gonna give him a break. On day 12, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna pull cedars on 6 more, and 3 will go with Ram A, 3 will go with Ram B. Day 14, same thing. Pull cedars on 6 more, 3 go with Ram A, 3 go with Ram B, and again on day 16. So here we've left the cedar devices in some of these used for as long as 16 days. And some of them we've pulled out the cedar devices at 8 days. But either way, all these females should come into heat within about 48 hours after we pull these cedar devices. And so what I think the beauty of this is that if we have sexually mature rams, they shouldn't have any trouble covering 3 ewes on a every 2-day pull cycle that we have. And we've taken all 30 ewes and and hopefully we have close to 90-95% conception rates with with these 30 ewes. And so the large majority of them will be bred now over a 5-day period. We're really looking at an 8-day period. And ultimately, if we look at the variability, the biological variability that we're going to get within gestation length, we'll have all these ewes probably lamb within a 10 to 14 day window for us. And so it really does help to predict when these ewes are going to lamb. It shortens up the lambing season. And if any of you are lambing now, you know how we can get lambing, or if you're kidding, lambing or kidding fatigue. The longer that season goes on, it's inevitable that the more tired we get and the more careless we get, and that's when our lamb and kid losses really start to go up. I did see a question pop up there, Lissa. But then I missed it.
Yep. So the question was, and I was just going to mention it, was really about the ram to ewe ratio. So maybe if you could talk just a little bit more about, what is appropriate. So you have, this example here, but is there kind of a rule of thumb for like a ram to ewe ratio that people can follow?
Yeah, for estrus synchronization, I would not want to put any higher expectations on a ram or a goat buck than pulling cedars on 3 females every other day. I think it's just inevitable if you start to go up to 4 cedars or 5 cedars every other day, you're just gradually going to start to see a slightly lower conception rate in this particular protocol. Now, keep in mind, we're going to bring up some numbers here a little bit later on. If you're not interested in using estrus synchronization, if you just want to throw your ram out with your ewes for 35 days, bring them back in after 35 days and hope that the majority are pregnant, you're probably there in that scenario looking at a ram to ewe ratio of anywhere from 1 ram to 20 to maybe even 30 ewes, right? Because those ewes are naturally going to distribute themselves over their 17-day estrus cycle. Was there another question list?
Yep, there was. Yep, there was one follow-up question to that. So the question was, how does out of season kind of affect your scenario? So does that have any influence on the scenario as you kind of presented it?
Yeah, if we're out of season, you could take, and so in other words, let's say you're a producer that's looking at starting to breed some ewes here in May, or maybe even earlier into April. And of course, in that scenario, we're outside of the normal sexual season of sheep because days have now gotten long, which we're all looking forward to, and they've gotten warm. But that's when reproductive activity, we know in our small ruminants in particular, really starts to shut off. And it's just because they're not exposed to as much melatonin, right? And so when melatonin levels fall down, ultimately what happens is that the ewe stops cycling. Uh, in in that scenario, though, we can still use a protocol like this, but we could actually start to pull CEDARs as early as 6 days after they were inserted. And the reason is that without getting into a full explanation of the estrus cycle, since that ewe's not having a regular estrus cycle, we can leave a CEDAR device in for 6 days and just assume that when we pull that CEDAR device, she's going to come into heat for us because she's not going to have a structure on her ovary called a corpus luteum that will keep progesterone levels high. When we pull that CEDAR device, progesterone levels drop. And the biological response that we get is that ewe comes into heat when progesterone levels drop. And so we could pull CEDAR devices as early as 6 days, excuse me, if we were in, let's say, April or May, and we could continue on with this protocol just as it is. The key, though, is that doing a breeding soundness exam on your ram or your goat bucks that you have is just that much more important when we're out of the sexual season. So don't make an investment in these CEDAR devices and this PG600 if you haven't done a breeding soundness exam on your rams and on your goat bucks, because just like the ewe is not having regular estrus cycles at this time of the year, we would also not expect for our rams or goat bucks to be in really producing at maximum capacity when it comes to sperm cells. Let's move on to preparation of rams. And so we're going to talk about some nutritional considerations of rams, what's all involved in a breeding soundness exam like we've discussed, and then some general management aspects of rams before and during the breeding season. So we'll start with nutritional considerations here first. Yeah, I think we all have that young ram lamb that we're excited to use. He's many times he brings in, he's got the potential to bring in some new genetics and make some performance improvements in the next lamb crop that we have. And so how do we manage him? And these are just some real general things in terms of what we can really truly expect out of that individual. We would like him to achieve 50 to 70% of his mature body weight before the breeding season. And so if you think his mature weight is going to be about 200 pounds, well, then he better be 140 if we're really going to expect him to do his job for us. Also, just be conscious of what's realistic in terms of expectations for a young ram. He's got to be 5 to 7 months of age before he's starting to have a real strong libido, and associated with that libido has to be mature sperm cells, right? Those are the two things that males need to have in order for them to have achieved puberty. And many times with our young rams, it's not going to come on until they're at that range of 50 to 70% of their mature body weight. And it's also not going to come on until the days are shorter, nights are longer. And just like us, when nights are longer and days are shorter, we're exposed to more melatonin. That gets sperm cell production. And also when days start to become cooler, that just really helps to cool days, help to hasten the onset of maximum fertility in these young rams. And we talked about body condition scoring. I do like to feed rams and goat bucks so that they're a little bit above average in terms of their body condition score. And so I think if we can manage them at closer to a body condition score of 3.5 or 4, so that they have kind of that relatively smooth bodied appearance, and those areas of their body behind their shoulder and down in their flanks and down, I guess, kind of around their hip and around their hip bones, they're all filled in and they're nice and smooth. This does not mean excessively fat. We certainly don't want to get our rams excessively fat because we can see a decrease in fertility in response to that. But what this does do is it gives us that opportunity for these males to lose a little bit of body weight as they are sexually active and as they're traversing through that ewe flock, and as those bucks are moving around and demonstrating all this pre-copulatory behavior that bucks do with these goat does. They're going to just simply lose weight. They're burning more energy. And many times they're just not as interested in eating either. Real aggressive breeders, you'll see that they lose a lot of weight during the breeding season. And I usually anticipate about a 10 to 20% loss in body weight. And so if you have a ram, for example, that's let's just say 250 pounds at the start of the breeding season, and he's an active breeder, he might be down to 200 pounds as we get towards the end of the breeding season. And so we want to give him some reserves, if you like, some body fat reserves to get through the season. If I would, I do work with a number of breeders with BSEs or just as they deal with reproductive management issues, and some of the common nutritional problems that I've noticed over the years with rams is that they're either too thin, they have a body condition score less than 3 when I make observations on that male, or they're simply too fat. They have a body condition score of greater than 4. We know that fat can be deposited around what's referred to as the spermatic cord of these males. And as fat forms around the spermatic cord, there's a real important structure that's housed within that spermatic cord just above the testicle called the pampiniform plexus. And if that gets surrounded with fat and the testicle gets too fatty, if you like, or too much subcutaneous fat around the upper portion of it, we simply have less of ability to dissipate heat away from those testicles. And those testicles do need to be at 5 to 6 degrees Celsius below body temperature in order for us to have normal sperm cell production. Another common nutritional problem is that I would see producers managing their young rams with their mature rams, and those mature rams push those young rams out of the way, and those young rams never get up to that 50 to 70% of their mature body weight, and they're just not ready to be productive during the breeding season. And, I sit back here and I think, geez, do I got a mineral block in, or do I have free access to mineral to my rams right now as I'm sitting here and have this on the slide? And I'd urge you to think the same thing. Do my males have access to mineral? A variety of minerals are included in those mineral blocks, and ultimately all those minerals play a key role in a variety of physiological functions. So don't forget your mineral. Other common nutritional problems, those high body condition score rams are obviously offered too much grain. When they're offered too much grain, the microbes within the rumen, which are really there to take advantage of high cellulose plant products and convert it into energy. Too much grain, though, we oftentimes we can really mess up the microbial population and the rumen of our small ruminant species, and so we'll see a decrease in fiber digestion and a decrease in utilization of our forages. Another problem associated with this is that we can see an increased incidence of acidosis, rams getting sick because they're simply fed too much grain. They'll get, we're at a higher risk of having an imbalance between our calcium and phosphorus ratio. And so we can get what's called urinary calculi. And based on the clinical signs of urinary calculi, we refer to this as water belly, where, for example, we'll get a stone in the urinary tract, and that bladder will literally leak urine, and ultimately we get this water belly appearance. By this stage, death is really on the horizon. And then anytime we offer too much grain to these breeding males that we have, what happens is we typically have more urea coming out through the urinary tract. That urea will irritate the free end of the penis, that urea will irritate the sheath, and that irritation and then subsequent debris getting on the sheath, for example, will result in some scabbing or some lacerations on the sheath, and that's referred to as pizzle rot. And I've seen rams before to where their sheath is completely scabbed shut, and it's hard for them to get their extend their penis out during the natural mating process. And obviously, if you look at the abrasions on the free end of this male's penis, it'd be very uncomfortable for him to breed, and chances are he just would stop breeding females. We're going to talk about the real basic components of a breeding soundness exam, and so Alyssa, we can move on to that. Yeah, and so a BSE, or breeding soundness exam, should be performed, I'll say 1 to maybe even 2 months before the breeding season, because that gives us enough time to either bring that male back into his potential for maximum fertility or find a replacement for him. But the first part of a breeding soundness exam involves a physical exam where we'll evaluate the eyes of the male. We'll evaluate his feet and legs, make sure that he, if he needs a hoof trim, give him a hoof trim. If he's got some foot scald, clean it up. Evaluate his eyes and his mouth as well. And so when it comes to eyes, we know that many times rams will see ewes in heat based on changes in their behavior before he actually ingests the pheromones from that ewe that's in heat. So eyes are really important for a ram to maximize the number of ewes that he can breed. And obviously he has to be pretty mobile. If you've ever sat back and watched a ram or a goat buck during the breeding season, they're working hard, as they should be. That's what we've selected them to do. And then their mouth as well. Make sure that that male has a full mouth of teeth so that he can maintain his body condition score. And then also keep an eye out for any open wounds that male may have. Shear him depending on the time of the year because we really want to prevent any issues with fly strike occurring. When it comes to the reproductive exam, a scrotal circumference should be done on rams. That scrotal circumference in mature rams should be at least 32 centimeters. This is just the circumference at the widest point of the scrotum as shown in this picture. Ram lambs should be at 30 centimeters. It doesn't necessarily mean that a mature ram with a scrotal circumference of 29 centimeters isn't going to be fertile, but chances are he's just not going to be able to cover as many ewes as what you might like him to cover. And so just keep that in mind. We also know that scrotal circumference is related to ewe fertility. Larger scrotal circumference rams have higher fertility daughters. It's just a fact. And so we can select for males with larger scrotal circumference and ultimately have a more fertile ewe flock if we're keeping replacements out of them. Keep in mind too, as you palpate those testicles, they should be firm, kind of like an orange, not soft and squishy like a banana. If they're firm like an orange, they're producing sperm cells. And as we palpate that testicle too, we can palpate and feel for this structure that really goes along kind of what we call the medial side of the testicle. And so if these are the male's testicles sitting right here, my thumbs would be the medial side, the inner sides of the testicle. We're going to see that right there in those locations. That's where the epididymis is going to be located. The bottom of that epididymis, the tail, many of you have maybe felt it in the past. It's like a thumb-like protrusion, but that's where all those sperm cells are stored. A mature male, he'll store anywhere from 5 to 10 ejaculations worth of sperm cells within the tail of his epididymis. And then those sperm cells come up from the tail, go through the body of the epididymis, through the head, and they mature and gain this progressive motility before they actually go up through the vas deferens and up to the base of the penis just before ejaculation in the male. But we want to feel that epididymis and see if there's any physical damage to it. If it's inflamed, if inflammation of the epididymis is referred to as epididymitis, that's caused by maybe that ram getting his testicles stepped on, maybe a bee sting, maybe an infection by a specific bacteria referred to as Brucella ovis that will lead to infertility in rams. But we want to palpate the testicles to really determine if that's an issue. And again, evaluate the penis in the sheath. Here's a healthy looking sheath on the upper left-hand corner. And there again is a picture of a penis that has some abrasions. That ram likely will not breed because he will be in pain during the breeding process. And again, probably something that could be avoided if we kept a cleaner pen and we didn't feed that ram too much grain. Keep in mind too that a BSE, it does involve a semen test. And so we collect semen and we evaluate it and we say it's acceptable or it's unacceptable for breeding purposes. But keep in mind too, if we have an infertile ram or we have poor semen quality, it's going to take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks to improve that sperm cell production and that semen quality. And keep in mind that anytime we get above 95 degrees Fahrenheit and we get a higher temperature and humidity index, it's really does hinder semen production and semen quality. And so providing fresh shade or fresh water, excuse me, and shade really helps to maximize sperm cell production. And then keep in mind too that even if weather is very comfortable at the beginning of the breeding season for you, if that male would happen to get a bacterial infection, he'd come down with a fever, his body temperature would be elevated, and that would hinder sperm cell production as well. And again, still takes 6 to 8 weeks to recover from that and for him to return to maximum fertility. A variety of semen collection methods do exist out there. I know a number of producers that have purchased their own electroejaculation devices, and so we can see those in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. You're looking at maybe an investment of $200 to $400, depending on the device that you get. But those devices are very effective at getting a ram to ejaculate, collecting that semen, and then just sticking it on a slide underneath the microscope and simply looking for a swirl effect or some movement of sperm cells. If that's not the desired device, there's also the artificial vagina, which is up at the top of that picture. Yeah, these are kind of standards that we have for semen in our small ruminant species. 30 to 70% motility is probably good enough for us to enter the normal breeding season for males. And if we're early in the breeding season and it's at 30%, chances are a month later into that breeding season, it's going to be up to 70% or maybe even closer to 95 or close to 100%. Morphology, we want the majority of those sperm cells to look like good, healthy sperm cells if we're going to expect them to fertilize eggs within the ewe's reproductive tract. A normal semen volume for the male is about a half mil to 1.5 mils. And so really like the tip of my pinky finger is what we're expecting for a quantity of semen in itself. And then a concentration. Okay? A normal concentration for a ram is going to be 2 to 3 billion sperm cells per every milliliter. And so every time he ejaculates, chances are he's providing us with anywhere from 1.5, maybe up to 5 billion sperm cells. So he provides us with a lot of sperm cells when he ejaculates, but maybe not always, unless we have the right tools to calculate sperm cell concentration, it's probably best just to look at it as it's sitting in a tube. And if it has a thick, creamy color, that's normal concentration. If it looks more like cloudy water, that is not a normal concentration. It's too low. And another thing we can look for is white blood cells, which would be indicative of a low level of infection within his reproductive tract. Yeah, and so a BSE it does give us an indicator as to whether or not that ram is fertile. But we do know that if we were going to bring 10 rams into a facility and do a BSE on them, about one of the 10 rams, chances are, is going to fail that obesity or fail that BSE, and it's either because he's going to fail because the semen quality is just simply too poor. He's got and he's dealt with some heat stress issues. Maybe he failed because he's just too overweight. Maybe he's dealing with some brucella ovis. Maybe he's got some injuries. Maybe his nutritional status isn't where it should be. Maybe he's just too young. Okay, but we can test for all these causes or look for all these causes of infertility. If we hit the next slide, one of the things that we aren't able to test for when we do a BSE though is a poor libido. I've had rams before that will simply pass all these aspects of the physical exam as well as these aspects of the reproductive exam, but at the end of the day, these rams will fail a BSE because they simply don't have a desire to mate ewes. And we know that there's a certain percentage of rams that just simply don't have a strong enough libido. Yeah, a little bit about general management, and I know we're just about done here, but let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, 1 month before the breeding season, make sure you check that ram's hooves, get him trimmed up, deworm him. Again, I'd suggest staying away from valbazen because not only in rams but other species, valbazen has been shown to reduce semen quality, and shear rams as well to minimize their heat stress and infertility. Here's the ram to ewe ratios that we discussed before. I've seen mature rams enter ewe flocks that have an extended breeding season past 35 days, and they can easily breed 75 ewes within a longer breeding window. Normal number that you're going to see within the literature is closer to 25. Lambs, anywhere from 15, but I've also seen all the way up to 50 if we have a smaller breeding area that we expect those rams to breed in. If we're synchronizing estrus activity, then we obviously need to reduce the number of ewes at a given time we're going to expose to those males. Marking harness, again, the best reproductive management tool that we as sheep and goat producers have. Notice with a marking harness, we change the colors. We change them from the lightest colors possible to the darkest colors possible every 16 days. And if you want to click the slide there, Lissa, for me, if in that first 16 days, you don't see any marks on your ewes and you have a ram out there with a marking harness, either your ewes aren't cycling, you have a problem with your harness, and maybe you got too much mud, for example, on your crayon, or you lost your crayon, or you have a ram that just simply doesn't have a high enough libido to be servicing your females. Next slide. After 16 days, if we see maybe we did have a lot of marks during the first 16 days, we're not seeing any marks after that 16-day window. We're now into the, we do start to see marks after that 16-day window. That's really more than likely indicative of poor ram fertility. And we have to sit back and say, did we do a BSE? And if not, then chances are, he's got some fertility issues, and that's why he's remarking ewes. But marking harness lets us know that. Yeah. Keep in mind too, you don't need to check marks on your ewes every day. If you're like me, you don't get home in the fall of the year until after it's dark and you can't see your ewes out in the breeding pasture. But on the weekends, you can check them and just see which ewes were marked during the week. Write those numbers down so you have somewhat of an expected lambing date to go with those ewes, and you'll save more lambs at the time during the lambing season in itself. This is just a list of supplies that I think a producer can have on hand as he or she is preparing for the breeding season, and it'll be available here on this recording, and you can go back and take a look at that. And so 3 take-home messages for you. Preparation for a successful lambing season, it does start prior to the breeding season, right? So if we want to have success at the lambing season, we got to be thinking really 7 months in advance. It does involve management of both rams and the ewes. And so even if we have a very mobile, high fertility ram with a high libido, if our ewes are dealing with some issues or had some, we've disregarded them maybe from a nutritional standpoint, we just can't expect to maximize the success of our breeding season or our lambing season. And I'll just say this, time invested before the breeding season will minimize labor at lambing, and it'll lead to increased flock productivity and profitability of your flock in general. And that's all I have. So thank you, Lissa, and thank you, Carolyn, and I'd be happy to take any questions or have any discussions with the group as well.
Okay, the chat has been a little bit quieter tonight than it has been in the past. I don't know if we have any other questions tonight. I think we kind of covered them as you went.
Okay.
We'll give everybody a few seconds here to drop in if they got some questions. We had a question, can we go back to the checklist? Let me see if I can pull that one back up. We did have a question about any recommendations for record keeping software.
Yeah, I don't have any personal recommendations for record keeping software. I know there's a few tools out there. There's even some apps that you can download on your phone. Um, I'm more of an individual that is comfortable keeping records on paper, but there is systems out there, and even we can get into I suppose even some of our maybe slightly more expensive, but also quite reliable electronic ID systems. But yeah, I don't have any specific recommendations for software.
We did have a question, and I think it relates to the slide we have pulled up right now.
Yeah.
Somebody had commented that they've heard copper sulfate can be fairly corrosive. Should zinc sulfate be used instead? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that yeah, I think that's fair enough to say that it can be corrosive, and I would say that if I look at my historical involvement in the sheep industry and different sheep operations that I've worked for, we've probably gravitated more towards zinc sulfate as opposed to copper sulfate. Yeah.
Mhm. I think that's the last question we've got in the chat right now. I know sometimes people are typing furiously in the background.
Mhm.
What we could do, I can find it on my screen, is let folks unmute now that we're kind of through our material tonight if they have questions. So anybody that doesn't want to type in the chat, if you do have a question, you should be able to unmute yourself now. So if that's easier for you, you should be able to do that.
If nobody has any questions, I'll just go through our ending part. So look for us at our topic hub, our website. And please take that survey if it's popping up for you. We do have a new updated place on Facebook if you would like to follow us on that. And you can join us next month for grilling and cooking lamb with Cody Hemke. So thank you all for joining us. If you still have questions, I'll stop talking and you can ask them, but just wanted to get those few last slides in so everybody knows that we will be joining together again next month on April 12th. And if anybody's like me, I love to eat lamb, so that should be fun.
All right, I think it looks like everybody did such a great job that they're ready to go to bed already. Got all
But it
their
is
questions answered. They can sleep soundly.
I know it's kind of hard to think about the lambing or the breeding season when you're in lambing, but I think that's also a time that gets us thinking about the next breeding season, like, oh, maybe I should do this better, or that works for me. So it's a good time to talk about them all so we can make those changes. Sometimes change doesn't happen overnight. So thank you so much for sharing that information, and we will get this posted on our YouTube channel as soon as we can do that. It may take us a while, but we'll hope to see it there.
So we've got a question there from Jante Brown. Is that right? I didn't see the full question.
Says the abortion vaccine you talked about, I've heard it being off-labeled for sheep. How has it done for goats, with goats?
Yeah. So I have to say I don't have a lot of experience using that vaccine with goats. I think it's fair to say it's probably like any vaccine is that it's not effective in 100% of the animals that do receive the initial dose as well as the booster, and and so it's probably going to depend a little bit on the strain of the bacteria that's causing your abortions as well. And so I don't have any experience with the goats per se that I can really say. But if you, for example, did have a diagnostics lab evaluate the aborted kid fetus and the aborted placenta from your goats in the past, that should give you a pretty good idea as to whether or not that vaccine is going to be effective for you.
All
For
right, I
many
think we're gonna go ahead and wrap up, so I'm going to stop recording. Thank you, Lista.